Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're live with the very first ClimateTech Founders Summit and really excited. We're getting started. I see people are streaming in to watch us, which is really exciting. Thanks for joining us today. I'll give you a brief background before we get Katja, who is already on stage, the director of 1014, our main partner for this event. To say a few introduction words to this as well. I'm Michael Schaffrath. I'm the founder of Impact Hustlers. Impact Hustlers started as a small side hustle of a podcast interviewing entrepreneurs that solve social and environmental problems. We've been releasing weekly podcasts since then, interviewed about 100 founders from really small early stage companies to massive scale-ups across the US and the UK. And this is our first major event. We've been always hosting events, but this is really the first bigger one. And just a few months ago, this was just an idea for us. And actually, between Ben, Katja, and myself, we brainstormed a few ways of what we could do together. And just a few months ago, we were like, oh, we got to do this. We got to get some founders together across the US and Europe. And now today we have more than 300 founders, investors, and ecosystem leaders on here. This is the MVP. So this is our first iteration. We love your feedback for the next 2 days. If you have any ideas, things how we can evolve this in the future, do contribute that in the chat, or reach out to us afterwards. One note as well, for after the first 2 panels that we're doing, we're about to have our first panel in a second. There is actually a networking functionality on Hopin here. So you can actually click on the networking tab on the left side, and that will randomly connect you to other participants today. And you can connect to people from across Europe, from across the US, and all over the world if you're keen for that. With that, I'd love to introduce Katja, the director of 1014. This event wouldn't exist without them. So I really appreciate you being here, and please say a few words to introduce.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I have to say, this event definitely would not take place without you. So good morning to everyone in the United States, and good afternoon to all who are tuning in from Europe and elsewhere. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the ClimateTech Founders Summit, organized, as we can see, in collaboration with Impact Hustlers and supported by Change Now. Just very briefly, 1014 is a New York-based nonprofit organization that provides a space for ideas. So we take up global topics and bring people together from all backgrounds to move things forward. Global warming and more sustainable approaches are a focus of our work. So we started this year with 5 transatlantic climate talks. We featured articles on local climate initiatives in collaboration with the magazine Urban Activist, and are now proud to host this summit in the run-up to Glasgow. How can technology and entrepreneurial action become a crucial driver in fighting climate change? How can we unlock the full potential of corporates, startups, and investors and max out on their impact to reverse the current climate trajectory? So I'm super excited to learn about this opportunity, these opportunities we hopefully have. And I hope that some of you will use this digital summit to connect, exchange, and form partnerships, which will help great ideas to come to life. Thank you so much again to Michael Schaffrath of Impact Hustlers for conceptualizing and organizing this important summit. And thank you to Change Now for the support. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Katja. Thanks so much for the words. Do check out the work that 1014 does, mainly in New York. The website is 10141014.nyc. So do check out what they're doing as well. With that, I'll ask Katja to basically log off, and we'll actually introduce our first 2 speakers for today and the first session for everyone. So really excited to introduce 2 exciting speakers in the climate tech space and introduce the first session. But before we do that, what I'd like to do again, first of all, a big thanks obviously to 1014 But Katja already mentioned Change Now as well, and they've been really absolutely supportive in helping make this event happen, especially the whole team really at Change Now. Change Now is the biggest gathering of solutions for the planet. They host a big in-person conference every year in Paris, and next year they will gather more than 20,000 people in Paris to discuss ways on basically solve the most pressing problems in the world, not just climate tech, but across all kinds of verticals. So you should definitely check out Change Now as well. And again, this event wouldn't have happened without them. And two other partners I'd like to thank as well is X and Y in London, which are providing the space to host this from today, and also Visualizing Ideas in the background doing tech support for you. If you're listening to this, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat on the right side. Just say what you're doing. Feel free to even put a link or an email address if you're comfortable with that, so people can get in touch with you. And with that, I'd like to introduce the very first session. So Candice and Shilpika, if you could switch on your video and join us, that would be amazing. Great to have you. Welcome. So very quick introduction and we'll get started. The first session, this is really our fireside chat, and we've put this as the very first session for a reason. I think in the last few weeks and months, we've seen a lot of talent, investment, corporates kind of prioritizing the topic of climate tech. I think just following the news in the last few months, I've seen so many new funds being launched in the space. I've seen so many people transition their careers into climate tech, and that's super exciting. And Candice, who is the director of climate tech at On Deck, is probably one of the people making that happen in one way with On Deck, which is basically a program helping people both transition their careers into climate tech and connecting people in the climate tech ecosystem. And Shilpika is one of the fellows that went through the first cohort of the program. And as a result, or at least the On Deck program helped with that, she now became a founder in the climate tech space. And the reason we put this first is because one of the big themes of the summit is how can we get more of the smartest people in the world to dedicate their time to climate tech and solving problems related to climate change. And I think On Deck is just one example of how this could be done. And we'll follow up on this with the next panel where we have a few ecosystem leaders discussing this topic in more depth. But with that, I'm really excited to have you both on the session today, Candice and Shilpika. I'd love to get Candice to start. Introduce yourself a little bit more extensively. What brought you into climate tech personally, and what is On Deck doing in climate tech?
Big questions. Thank you, Maiko, for having us. This is really exciting, and thank you everyone for being here. So my journey, and I'll try to condense this. I feel like as a teenager and as a kid, I just loved nature and the environment. And I have immigrant parents, and they were like, "You're going to be a doctor." And I was like, "I don't think I'm going to be a doctor." And they're like, "Well, you can't, you're not going to make money with trees." So I went to University of Michigan, and I actually started with environmental sciences. And it felt very sad because all the professors had been in the field for 30 plus years and just thought humans are not going to change. We can't do anything about it from a human perspective, even though the science is there. So I got into policy and business, thinking that those were maybe two levers that I could pull. Policy was a bit too slow for me, so I ended up doing more of a business route. Moved to Singapore, taught business communications, did microfinance in Cambodia, got into tech when I came back to the US, and actually sort of forgot about climate and environmentalism, was doing other things and felt like, what is my purpose, right? What am I doing? And I got really interested in the ethics of AI. That was my calling, I thought, right? This existential crisis potentially or problem of AI being biased, and I wanted to do math again. So I ended up coming back to Michigan for a grad program in stats. And during my first semester, the 2018 IPCC report came out, and that gutted me. I was just like, this is everything that I care about. It's everything that I've strayed from, but actually, this has always been my passion. And so I left with a master's, learned some data science skills and geospatial and things like that could be helpful in climate, took sustainable finance classes. And while I was there, I was trying to understand how I could get involved in climate. And I actually thought, and I forget this sometimes, this was early 2020, so not that long ago, I thought that there was no way to make money in climate and make an impact. And I thought I was going to take over my dad's liquor store and do activism on the side. Like, that was actually my career plan, because I just was like, I don't know how else to make an impact in a clean way that I think, is intentional and with integrity. And of course I was wrong like that. And that I was so wrong. And it's grown a lot since then, but that was my perception at the beginning of 2020. And so I tried to figure out, if I'm not gonna go that route, what are the other options? I got really involved in my climate journey, and we started this idea jam where it was basically a pitch session. I was like, well, if I start this event, I should probably pitch the first idea. And so it kind of forced me to think of like, what startup would I start in the climate space? And I realized I have no idea, because I don't come from a climate background. I have like a data science skill set. I can be technical, I can be on the business side, but I'm not climate deep. I don't have a PhD in climate science, and that's not my route. And so the thing that I pitched was actually really close to what I ended up building out at On Deck, which was this ecosystem play of bringing together people who are climate deep alongside people who are not climate deep, right? So who have expertise in climate, maybe have spent 20, 30 years in utilities, in gas, in clean energy, or recent PhDs in niche areas in climate tech. And then also people who have built and sold sometimes billion-dollar companies, or are software engineering professors, like really experts in the entrepreneurial side and the tech side, who want to get into climate, make that balance about 50-50, bring them through a cohort, be really intentional about, most people wanting to be founders and joining the space, having 20% of the cohort be supporters. And that's what we started. So basically I pitched the idea. Eric, who's a co-founder of On Deck, reached out randomly 2 weeks later and said, we're thinking about starting a climate fellowship. I think you'd be great at it. I know you want to do climate. And that's how it came together. So I can dig into any of those details, but that was my trajectory into climate and how On Deck ClimateTech started.
Amazing. And how many people have been through the program so far?
About 400 at this point. So we started March 7th. And we've had 2 cohorts. The third one just started. So yeah, about 400.
Amazing. So one of the 400 is here with us. Shilps, I'll let you introduce yourself as well, and your journey, how you got into climate tech.
Sure. Thanks, Maiko, for having me. And Candice, thank you for being on your journey so I could be part of such an incredible community. So thank you. So I'm Shilps, co-founder of Salt. I'll tell you more about that later. But unlike Candice, I did not grow up with a lot of nature. I grew up in India. I think I know today that I grew up with climate change. Climate change was not a thing that happened later in my life. I grew up with a lot of air pollution. That was exacerbated by changing weather patterns. I grew up with droughts. I grew up with water shortages. I also grew up with what is still a problem 30 years later, which is lack of constant electricity and dirty electricity. So it's kind of crazy when I now look back that climate change was always a part of my life. However, I had to take a pretty long route to realize that this is what I wanted to work on for the rest of my life. So I grew up in India. I went on to build pretty then unsexy fintech architecture for payments companies, pretty sexy now. So I did that long before it was sexy. Then went on to run commodities businesses for global investment banks. So knowingly, unknowingly, I was part of the fossil fuel financing system. However, when I look back today, so much of what I learned then, we thought natural gas was super clean. It's changed, but it really helped me understand kind of how does finance and capital markets work in tandem to let the reign of fossil fuels continue and the funding cycle continue. After 5 or 6 years of that, I came to my own sort of internal crisis of purpose. And that's a much longer story, but ultimately what I ended up doing was I developed a relationship with nature. So I was living in London at that time. I started to explore the River Thames and the canals, not very clean in London, but still cleaner than some other rivers I've been on. And I learned the sport of stand-up paddling. And I had this wild idea of combining my newfound love for the sport of stand-up paddling and water to understand really ground level stories around the climate crisis as relates to water. So I went back to India, where I'm from, and spent the best part of 4 months living out of a tent, 2 pairs of clothes, and on my stand-up paddleboard, stand-up paddling from the top of the Ganges River, which is one of the most polluted, one of the most holy rivers on the planet. So where it originates in the Himalayas, by the way, that glacier where it originates is absolutely hammered by the climate crisis, and went all the way down to where the river meets the ocean. And that ended up being a Guinness World Record, that journey itself and the length of the journey. More importantly, what I understood was lots of nuances around climate justice, lots of nuances around socio-political, cultural, like how does that all, like systemically, how does a climate crisis, relate to people's lives? And ultimately, it's a people and human crisis. So understanding that has been a big inflection point. That was 2 years of my life, after that journey, spending time with governments, nonprofits, and other for-profit institutions, showing them, narrating, storytelling what I'd learned, working with them in consulting capacity. Got really jaded by that whole process. It moved really slow. It was very exhausting. So went to early stage venture, and then went back to fintech. But as I was doing so, I met my now incredible co-founder, Aina. And Aina is a founding fellow of ClimateTech. And, she was like, hey, look, we've been like bouncing ideas around climate like for a while. Why don't we just use this time to learn more, grow our network, but give back things that we know, but ultimately like really solidify the idea of building a company. So that's how we got here. And it's been such a ride. People in OnDeck are amazing. And it's incredible once you put yourself into the community, how like different connections just sprout. Like you kind of have to be in the room, and then the room kind of like just makes things happen. So it's been quite a journey. And I think it's in so many ways it's just begun. Like if you work on climate problems, that's like it's a long journey. It's a journey of a lifetime. So we're on it. We're really excited. And
exciting. Love it. Yeah, I think you mentioned so many interesting facets of the ClimateTech ecosystem. Obviously, I think there's been startups and technology companies solving problems related to climate change for a long time, actually. There's been kind of the green tech theme, or circular economy, all kinds of different labels that were attached to those companies before climate tech kind of emerged. But what I find really interesting around climate tech is really this combined urgency and optimism. Urgency of acting, we need to do something now, and also actually we can use technology and profit-driven business models to solve problems related to climate change. So as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot has happened in the last few months, I would say, in terms of climate tech. Just a week ago, SOSV, one of the big deep tech accelerator and venture firms, they hosted their first Climate Tech Summit, which was super exciting. Bill Gates is moving into the space with breakthrough energy. There's loads of announcements. Do you feel like there is the massive shift of talent into climate tech is already happening, first of all, and what is still needed, right? Like it seems like, oh, everybody's moving into climate tech, seems good, right? But I'm sure you have a bunch of opinions on what do we still need to do to convince the best people to dedicate their time on climate tech, maybe starting with Candice.
I think that some of the best talent in tech is moving into climate tech, and the barriers to entry in general are a mindset of there's often golden handcuffs, right, in tech, where you have this nice job and you get great benefits and equity and all of that. And the question is, do I leave this to go into climate tech where maybe I won't make as much money or get as much equity or won't be as big of a deal? And people like Bill Gates, Chris Sacca, like all of these big names are really, really good at explaining why actually you can make a ton of money in climate tech. And they're speaking from an investor's perspective, but for that to be true, startups have to be scalable and make a lot of money. And so I do think, just at a fundamental, for people with families, for people who are later in their career, who have a lot to offer the space from a technical and an entrepreneurial perspective, just knowing that they can still support their family in the way that they would hope to in climate tech feels like step one, right? Because there is that sort of want to support themselves. The next step, and I think that's happening. So I'm confident that that is becoming actually really clear. And that's a lot of what's behind a lot of investors coming into the space. There's so much money for early stage climate because people realize there's money to be made. The next step is understanding, okay, if I'm not going to be an investor, if I'm going to start a company, join a company, what's my role in this space, right? I personally, as well as a lot of people moving into the space, I'm not climate deep. I didn't do a PhD. I haven't worked in climate or utilities for years. I don't understand the space as well as I could if I wanted to start like a certain type of climate tech company. And so my thought, and I'm biased, of course, is that if you have someone who's an expert in entrepreneurship or on the tech side of things, find someone who's an expert on the climate side of things and partner. Because you're not going to be good at both sides. No one person is superhuman. And actually it's really, you need co-founders. That's the best companies often have co-founders. So if you're looking to start a company, I think surround yourself with people with complementary skills and backgrounds and learn what they're really interested in. The other things that I would recommend, and then Shilps, I'd love your thought, but really practical things that someone can do. So if you're looking to found a company, surround yourself by people with complementary skills. But also, if you're intrigued by an industry, go really deep. And this is stolen from Peter Reinhardt. So he gets all the credit for this. He started Charm Industrial, someone who had, started tech companies and now is in climate. And he was like, I just spent 6 months going really deep in carbon removal. And I threw out, 10 ideas that were probably fine ideas, but just, didn't make sense for me, or I wasn't super jazzed about them. But I found the idea that I was super excited about and I built in that space. Because any one person spending 6 months going really deep in anything in climate is probably an expert in that space at that point, right? That's how Lower Carbon, for example, where investors spent 6 months to a year just going deep on the science so they could understand the industry and actually start investing in a smart way. And so while you don't have to be an expert and you should partner with experts, you should probably go deep in an industry if you're really excited about it and you want to understand where the gaps in the market are. If you're looking to found a company, if you're looking to join a company, then I think you can take one of two routes. One is you can go deep on industry and really understand it super well, see what companies are out there and which ones you're most aligned with. The other approach that you can take is, let's say you're a marketing genius, you can just go really broad and look at Lower Carbon's website for the 300 plus jobs that are there. Look at blanking, but they're, work on climate, all these different ClimateScape, all these different companies that have a bunch of jobs, climate-based. And just look for marketing jobs. And you can go either skill route or industry route. So I'll stop there. I think people are coming in, and I think that the barrier to entry is understanding that there's money to be made, right? So you can support your family. And two, understanding how to even get involved once you make that decision that you do want to get involved.
Love that, Shilps. Before you join in, just one point on that as well. I think what I love about climate tech, it's not really a sector as such, right? It's just kind of a theme that goes across so many sectors and so many different types of companies that are being started. And if I look at the audience and people introducing themselves, there's so many different approaches you can take. So whatever your skill set may be, the likelihood that you can use that skill set to make a difference to climate change is pretty high, I think. So I've seen very marketing-driven companies, very design-driven companies, that are all about getting people to, compensate for their carbon footprint. There's very engineering-driven companies, deep tech, biotech companies. There's such a broad range. So again, I love the point on you don't need a PhD in climate tech. I'm not sure if that exists even, but in climate science, let's say. But you can look at your own skills and see how can I make a difference to that. So Shilps, love your view on this topic as well.
Sure. So I agree with everything that Candice has said. I think a couple of ways to slice the opportunity. So if you look at every company today, every company that exists today, they're inherently long emissions and short carbon. So there's opportunity within existing companies to like build from within and catalyze like employee action, employee consumer demand to change the way to do things. That is, about a $4 trillion opportunity that we're playing in as Salt. But if you also look at what the future is, every company is also a climate company. Like climate, I think one of the challenges has been that we've externalized climate as something else that needs to happen, under the guise of ESG, net zero, whatever else stuff you want to throw at people. It's confusing and it's chaotic. Ultimately, if we believe that climate is inherently linked to like an existential like opportunity for a company, then there is everything that we can do. So if your skill set, as Candice just said, climate companies that are looking to become more climate positive, there's opportunity in every department there, because frankly, like appointing a head of sustainability and giving them like bugger all like incentives to do their work is just not going to cut it. I think we need different champions to champion from within for companies big and small to change. I think if you're looking to start something afresh, then as just Candice said, like if you're a marketing guru, if you're customer success, if you're B2B, so many companies are going to be B2B. Almost every company that's coming up today that's doing something hard tech is going to need to be B2B or B2G, like a business to government company. If you've done any of this stuff before, believe me, you are going to be in high demand for every single company that's being funded today. And there's thousands. And they'll continue to be thousands. So I think it's finding what you're fascinated by, but also what you think your skills are. So just as a personal example, Aina and I like sit at the intersection of fintech, climate solutions, climate activism, and finance. So the question we asked were, what are the sticky gears that we can like kind of make our dent in? And we thought it was climate finance. Someone who may come from a scientific background may think it's something related to biomass. I don't know anything about biomass, but I think I can figure out how to finance it if you're building a company. So it's just people figuring out their edge and finding a company to start with, because every skill is needed.
I'd love to dig deeper on that in a second, but also mention to everybody in the audience, there is actually a Q&A tab on the right side. So just next to the chat, you can click on Q&A and submit any questions you have for Candice and Shilpika, and I'll be happy to share them with them as well. So feel free to submit any questions there. Shilp, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper on your journey on that and what you think made you kind of make that journey into climate tech. You had actually a finance career as well, and then kind of over the years made the transition. On Deck was part of that as well. Tell us more about why you made that shift and what you recommend to somebody. I see, for example, Tangi in the chat already posted, hey, I'm a corporate finance guy. I want to, use my skills to improve society. What would be advice to somebody like him in terms of making that shift as well?
Sure. So I think Tangi or anybody else who's considering moving to a climate-centered career, I'll offer you a few things. You kind of just saying what Candice has said a few times in a different way is building climate companies is probably the biggest opportunity of our lifetimes. And if you believe that, it is an opportunity. So you could believe that from a financial angle. You could also believe that if you're an activist and you want to do something that is scalable, then from building a just society, climate is so centered to it. If you believe that your skills can be purposed for solving really thorny problems and you like really complex systemic problems, then maybe you're attracted to this. For me, it's what I learned and what I realized is that so much of what I learned from my sort of previous many-faceted careers is a couple of things. So one, to build functional, liquid, accessible carbon markets, we have to take lessons from dirty energy markets. There's reasons, that over 150 years, these markets were able to build themselves up and be deep and liquid and accessible and, investable. So frankly, how do we build that system? And for me, as I saw that parallel, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. I think we need, first of all, similar to what allows us to send payments from anywhere to anywhere. Not so much in Germany where I'm based, but generally, no dig at you, Maiko. But all the fintech and the basically the financial and technological infrastructure that underpins so many other industries today, most prominently fintech, and the liquidity that public sector equities or even crypto enjoys today. We can take those lessons and apply from what we know into building functional, accessible, liquid carbon markets. And everybody's coming at it from different ways. Some people are doing carbon capture, so it becomes a technology that's viable. Some people are building climate finance platforms like us. Some folks are building more competitive materials, so we no longer have to pay a green premium, because ultimately, as we go into Glasgow, it's really like everything is centered on climate finance. So that's where I saw my edge and my interest, kind of coming together. For folks who are trying to do so today, I would say, as Candice said, pick one thing and go deep into it. And I would really, really recommend reach out to people, because there is a certain kind of mission-driven sentiment in this community of people who are generally working on climate. And by the way, not just tech, climate solutions. Because climate solutions has been around for much longer, and this is a much more intersectional, group of people. Reach out to people; they will connect you to people. People want this thing to work, and fast within the next decade. We don't have time, so you will get the answers you seek as you reach out to people, and you will gain the knowledge you seek. And maybe you'll find like a fork, and then you jump, and then see what happens.
I want to add on to that briefly, which is. So I think of ClimateTech as anything that helps us get to a more sustainable economy. And so I like to keep it a little bit more broad, where it's like a business solution to scale, renewable energy, a financial solution like you all are doing, Shilps, to actually help the industry get ahead, and then tech solutions like most people think. And so ClimateTech can be broad, and you're right, it's not like one industry at all. It is truly everything. And the other thing I want to, there are two things that I want to dig in on. One is I would often use this phrase called that. I would say I want to be additive, not duplicative in this space. And so that's like a very, how do we help the ecosystem in general without, duplicating? And sometimes actually being duplicative is what people want. They're like, actually, I want 3 different solutions to this because we want to see which one sticks. And a lot of times founders, for example, might say, actually, here are the 5 competitors. You should invest in all of them because we just need this thing to work. And I've just learned, and this is such a great example of how collaborative this space is. It can be an emotionally taxing space. It can be, heart-wrenching at times. But once you have a community, once you reach out to people and really understand that people in this space right now, and I hope it stays this way, are here not because of the money, not because of the clout, whatever, but because they actually want to make a difference. And so reach out to people, like Shilp said, reach out to people, build your community, and now is a great time to be in ClimateTech because it's still a kind of small space. It's going to get bigger. So I think if you're looking to jump in now and make those connections.
We already gotten some inspiration from both of you on what you can focus on when you want to move into climate tech. You can focus on your skills, like what's my edge, what's my experience, how can I make a difference with my skills? But then on the other side, I think the exciting bit about any kind of impact-driven company is always bridging the gap between my unique skills and then what is kind of the global problem I'm trying to solve, and then what's the business model that can fuel everything and solve customer problems, not just the global problem, and combine all this together, right? I think that's like the hard bit about it. What I'd be interested in, maybe first for Candice, is do you see people going through the On Deck program, like many of them moving into a similar type of space within climate tech, coming up with similar type of ideas? Or is there any sort of way of thinking about what sort of problems should they even be solving, right? Like, do we need another carbon offset platform? Do we need another food sharing platform? Do we need as many as possible so that one of them at least works out? Or is there some sort of framework to decide, like, how can I have the most impact with my skill set and also solve like a customer problem so I can make some money with it and have a sustainable solution? Well, this is a big question, but maybe let's start with how can you decide with like what's the biggest possible impact you can have as a founder?
So I want to, this is such a good question. There are a few different angles to this. One is I try to be agnostic in terms of like, you know, if you're trying to come into climate, if you're trying to build anything in climate, like we will support you, just do it. If it fails, you'll have learned so much as long as you know, went deep and really tried, that your next company will probably be better, right? And so that's the first approach that I take with anyone is to try to be a bit more like, okay, amazing. You know, here are the competitors. I think you know the space. Go for it. Let's do it. And then there's also the second side, which is I, of course, have my own beliefs around which sorts of companies I think will be the most impactful. And the other thing that I do to try to encourage people is actually not focus on what's the most impactful thing that anyone could do or that you could do, because that just puts a shit ton of pressure on people, when I'd rather they just get started and figure out from there, even if it's, you know, 2 to 5 years from now, what they think is most impactful for them. And so I try to take a little bit of that pressure off from choosing that thing. And at the same time, I'm becoming more and more passionate about understanding what corporations, what individuals, what governments believe to be their biggest problems that need to be solved, gathering those problems and bringing them into the cohort to essentially say, we know that these are problems that have to be solved. These are the people giving us those problems. If you build something in this space, you will probably have a customer already there, because if you solve the problem, they will want to buy whatever you're giving them, or you'll have investors who are really interested in this space. And so I try to balance the encouragement and, you know, whatever you do is great, with also here are the problems that we know are real and that have to be solved that you might not think of because you don't have that vantage point, but you actually have some of the skills to be able to solve those problems.
Schultz, any view on that?
I think, you know, as we were thinking about like, where do we go in deeper? A common thing that can happen when you see tons of money going into climate tech space in general, like Europe, I think the PitchBook data just came out, like 12 billion or so going in this year, can feel like, oh my God, the space is so crowded, so much is solved. And because there's like 500 companies doing solar as a service, it's solved. You know, like 2% of the renewable energy mix in the US is solar. Despite this being like literally the cheapest source of energy, clearly it's not solved. So it may feel like when you're in this space, because people are just starting such great companies all the time, this stuff is solved. It's absolutely not solved. And the thing is, like, you know, we can't, like, when we think of like literally what we have to do is what none of us here have ever had to do, is to rejig an entire infrastructure for this planet, which is growing and growing. It's an opportunity and mammoth problem like no other. My advice to people would be to not be fixated on solving, as Candice said, the biggest possible problem, because as you solve little problems, you'll find, you know, one of the things that you'll have to connect is how do you fit into the system? You know, you can't like build a carbon capture thing without knowing how it becomes like relevant or financially viable. You can't build like new sexy types of plastic polymers without knowing how it will fit into the supply chain. So my hope is that people will tackle each of these pieces and modules that basically build the fabric of our economy, and kind of this rising tide will lift like everybody. So I think it's important to feel like it's just not solved, and so much needs to be done. We're really at the front of the curve, and I think whatever you think, as Candice said, is where you feel like you can continue on a roller coaster for the next 10 years. Do that thing.
Got it. We got a question from Robert Alexander in the audience, and he's asking a question directly to you, but maybe we can frame it both for yourselves as well as more generic advice for people in the audience. His question is, how do the panelists prove their companies are sustainable and not just greenwashing? Like, how are your companies you're working on, obviously on Deck and Salt, actually kind of making a difference and not just greenwashing? And do you think that's kind of a framework that people need to think about when they move into the space? How can we tell those two things apart?
Candice, I can start, because I think that was our starting point. So I'll give you a story, quick one. So 2014, when I was working still in banking, and we were helping big investors like pension funds, asset managers allocate their money towards commodities, everything from soybeans to oil to natural gas, etc. And I remember walking into a room with my pitch deck about some structure we had put together. And the person says, hey, I just heard of this ESG thing. Can you just kind of put a slide on ESG? Like, what do you mean put a slide on ESG? So, and that, by the way, has not changed for a lot of the big money owners and managers. So that is a clear, like that's something we took a clear problem with as a company and as a team of co-founders. And that's always been our guiding principle. So when we think of our company and we think of like, how do you help corporate action their net zero commitments, in a world that's filled with, frankly, bullshit offsets. And a lot of them, there's a study that came out that only 0.2% of offsets are any good. And in a world where, corporates are being peddled all kinds of dodgy ways of accounting, etc. And we're still, by the way, despite 14 trillion in ESG or net zero commitments, we're still en route to a 3-degree warming. So clearly, to Robert's question, something is not working. So that was the framing for the question we asked. And we asked ourselves, what can we do to be additional, to be permanent, if you think of like carbon offsets language, and to be viable and verifiable. And for us, it's really rejigging how we deploy proven technology using like innovative ways of financing that otherwise would not exist. And that also takes into account social justice and local, are we really putting something that's needed? You can put a solar panel on top of somebody who already has lots of clean energy. Is that additional? Kind of not really. But if you put a solar panel where otherwise the only option is a dirty coal fire grid, yeah, that's actually additional. So I think there's a few ways you can ask yourself, we definitely ask ourselves, that's front and center. And that's the villain actually that we're going after, greenwashing. So we can talk all day about it, been my previous experience, and we're committed not to repeat it.
My quick answer to this is that when we start the fellowship, so this is in the context of the fellowship, and a lot of these fellows are coming from tech or in climate, and we want to help them not create greenwashing companies. So the first thing that we do is we have an hour to an hour and a half discussion with a scientist who essentially lays out, these are the ways that we're fucked. Here's the water, here are all the different systems, and here are all the ways that we're fucked. And it's a come to Jesus moment. It's the first talk that we give, essentially say like, this is a real problem, right? And our assumption is if you know it's a real problem, you're not going to put shitty solutions out there if you know it's a shitty solution. Sometimes shitty solutions get out there, people don't realize at first, and then hopefully they iterate once they realize it's actually greenwashing and they need to pivot. The second speaker that we bring in is a climate psychologist to help people, deal with climate grief and deal with the fact that this is, we are on track for 3 degrees warming, and that is catastrophic. There's no beating around the bush there. And then, we work hard to instill a sense of stubborn optimism that creates a bias for action. So that's how we do it. And I want to make sure that we also answer Anonymous's question, because that is such a good question. Michael, do you mind if I just go straight into it? So question around, how do we ensure that we don't repeat ego-driven, competing, self-interest-based thinking that got us here in the first place? And this is a huge concern I have just as a citizen of the world. And, there's Saul Griffith, when we brought him in, said something like, he has this fear that, sure, we'll solve climate, right? Like we will, have whatever technological solutions we need to save us time and buy us time. We'll stay at 1.5 or 2 degrees, and we'll actually avoid some of those catastrophic warming, but water might not be clean, right? We might not have the environment that we even had today. Like it might be a worse environment. And so I think climate tech has to take into account the environment and not just be focused on degrees warming. And I also want to be clear, and I say this all the time in our fellowship, that entrepreneurship is one lever that we can pull. And so at On Deck, it's a very entrepreneurial community, and that's why we focus so much, right? We can do one thing, and we do that one thing really well, which is help people start companies and think about what companies to start and join early stage companies. But there's a lever of policy, there's a lever of activism, there's a lever of corporate activism, lever of, there are just so many different levers that different people can pull. And my hope is that people pull those levers, people who have that interest and who are really good at that make sure, if on the climate tech side, we'll make sure that we hopefully don't get to 3 degrees Celsius. But I hope that there are a lot of people working on the systemic changes that I actually think we need to be able to get out of an ego-driven world, because a lot of the systems that we play in, I think, kind of benefit from that and make it a lot easier to go in that direction. So that's my entrepreneurship is one lever. There's so many incredible levers that we need to be pulling at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. I think even on the SOSV ClimateTech Summit, there was a bit of a discussion around that. And one of the themes was like, obviously us as kind of people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the climate ecosystem, we believe that we just need to take action. We can't just wait for governments to put in regulation. But I think on the same hand as well, we do need everybody to work together. It won't be entrepreneurs only solving everything by themselves. I'm a big believer that, we can use some of the best features of capitalism to solve these problems. But again, like the question that came in is a really good one as well. Like, how do we avoid maybe negative effects that we're not even thinking about, right? So many technologies that we came up with as humans were really promising when we came up with them, but they had negative effects in the long run, right? Maybe as a closing theme for this session as well, I'd love to kind of go a little bit more into that. There is a lot of people that believe, basically, look, we've seen the digital transformation. We've seen like all these tech companies scale from tiny startups to giants, Facebook, Amazon, Google. We just need to repeat exactly the same for social and environmental problems. That seems exciting, but also seems like, okay, but with the digital transformation, already a few things went wrong in some ways. Obviously, we're having loads of debates around Facebook at the moment, other companies. So what should we repeat and what should we not repeat in the climate tech space? Who wants to go first?
Candice, do you want to go?
Yeah, happy to. I think, I don't come from a tech world where I know all that much that even I don't pay attention that much to the larger tech world. I'm like very climate or bust. And so my interpretation of this is actually mostly coming from an outsider's view, which is a lot of the solutions that we need are deep tech. And so learning from the deep tech solutions that have really worked and have scaled and made a huge impact is where I want to focus my time for learnings. I think a lot of the solutions will also be digital, but I would look more at the deep tech solutions that have worked. So that's my outsider's view on that.
Maybe just to chime in on that, I think, growing up in India, the fact that, when I go back, I can send, there is everybody from the hawker on the street to the street food dude, like they can do business and be involved in the economy using their phone. That's amazing. But by and large, in terms of concentrating influence and wealth and justice, big tech has not really had the best record. And I think climate is an opportunity which can't be solved in isolation. You can't decarbonize, where we live today. All three of us are living in developed nations with huge footprints, while still seeing that almost 1 billion people are without electricity. And at some point, and they don't have access to low cost of capital, even access to credit to somewhat like not burn not burn coal or burn like wood or whatever. So I think that is something we have to be really conscious of while building this new system, that the new system can't be unjust, because not only does that have a huge repercussion for society and is unfair and unjust, but actually it will not solve our climate ambition. So I think that is something that I would love to see every company think about, or some companies think about a bit more. And I think that's where big tech definitely, that's a lot of where like the challenges are coming from.
And the climate justice thing is so important. And I think it's so undefined to me, like working on what that actually means from a practical perspective. I would love to, and there are probably papers out there that I should read, but if anyone has them, point them my way. I think it's so important. And I want to see the practical steps that have been taken and that can be taken to make sure that that's front and center of everything that we do.
Got it. What is one shift that you'd like to see in the climate tech ecosystem as a last brief question in the next let's say in the next 10 years that needs to happen for the climate tech ecosystem to really make a difference? Do you see anything that needs to happen and change?
I think that the ecosystem is already trying to be incredibly collaborative, but we can do a better job of doing that. And so every, accelerator, incubator, community, just every piece of the ecosystem that is a sort of a network hub coming together. And I've heard of some investors who are, really successful investors who are starting climate funds and are like, I don't want to invest in deals that are being fought over because I want to be additive. And I actually think that we should share all of our deals across the investment world because why not, right? Like let's be super collaborative. And so again, I think people's intentions are there, but it's actually creating the systems to help the ecosystem come together and make that impact together. And I guess it's being positive sum is really what I mean. Like if we solve this together, then we can go a lot further and everyone wins.
Got it. Shilps, quick one.
Sure. So I feel like I'm talking my book, but I think the real valley of death, or where clean tech 1.0 didn't work so well and kind of met its challenges, is that making sure that everything that's being funded today, low tech, high tech, deep tech, hard tech software, has a way to keep growing and has the right funding and the right the support and the right mechanisms to keep growing. Because even if we solve for soil sequestration, it's still, we're going to need billions of dollars to scale those solutions. So those are the pipes and the infrastructure that we haven't yet built. People like us, but many other people are trying to solve this very thorny problem. And the fact that at Glasgow we're fighting over 100 billion is frankly depressing, because we need trillions of this every year. So I think that is something for this momentum to keep going and growing is really severely needed.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Candice. Thank you, Shilps, for joining us for this first session. We do need to wrap up. We have a very brief break now for the next 8 minutes, and then we have our next session coming up already. So for everybody that's around and keen to learn more about some of really key players in the climate tech ecosystem, I would say, especially if you're already a founder, we talked a lot about how to get from 0 to 1, even from whatever you're doing, into becoming a founder or making a contribution to climate tech. Now we're moving a little bit further. We're talking with some ecosystem leaders, with Chris Coleridge, the founder of Carbon 13 and lecturer at Cambridge University. They have developed a program that gets people to start companies in climate tech. Then we have Avra van der Zee. She's the COO of Elemental Accelerator, one of the I would say, leading climate tech accelerators and programs out there. And then I'm really excited to have Santiago Lefebvre as well, who, again, Change Now is a big supporter of this event. And Santiago is an ecosystem leader in the impact space in general, with Change Now being really the biggest gathering of solutions for the planet, as they call it, with more than 20,000 people joining every year. So stay online for that. We'll be back in about 6 minutes with that. And thanks, Candice and Shilps, for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you, Candice.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Bye.
Bye.